Billions of people just living out their lives, oblivious.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
There's something wrong. There's something wrong. You don't know what it is. You don't know what it's there. Like a splinter, driving you mad.
Bring the ship up to broadcast depth. We're going in. Taking Neo to see her.
See who? The Oracle.
Welcome aboard, everybody. We're happy you could join us for another round of what we hope to be insightful, mind-altering, mind-expanding conversation. I'm James Sangster, founder of Houston Ghost Research. HGR is a spiritual crisis intervention and paranormal investigation group in Houston. I'm also the author of Help, I'm Haunted, Dealing with Ghosts, available on Amazon Kindle. But before we jump into the interview and the topic for tonight, remember our show and the podcast in general is sponsored by Blue Rose Alchemy. Blue Rose Alchemy is a business my wife and I started out of my home lab. Yes, I have a home lab. How nerdy is that? I initially started out just blending flavors for vape flavors for a company out in California, and when we stumbled across Joe DeCat in his documentary, All the Gold You Can Eat, about Ormus, which we've done several episodes on the podcast about, I started playing around with Ormus, and we had some really positive experiences with Ormus, with family and friends, and we've been doing some experimentation and research on that stuff. So you can actually get research samples of Ormus through our website at bluerosealchemy.com. We're also looking at adding I've been doing this project back and forth with my wife. We're going to add a line of totally awesome natural soaps and bath products using stuff like all natural oils, literally the best oils we can find, because we'll be using this for ourselves as well, and we're all about quality. So we're using awesome stuff like I'm learning all about shea butter and cocoa butter and mango butter, and we found a great source for these phenomenal essential oils like lavender and jasmine. It's really awesome stuff. So we're developing this whole line of soaps, and we want to get into lotions and bath bombs and stuff like that. Andrea makes this incredible, I guess you would call it a bath salt. It's like a soaking salt made out of, I just used it last night. It's completely awesome. It's got Epsom salt and Dead Sea salt in it, baking soda, lavender and jasmine essential oil in this really awesome bath tea mixture. This stuff has just got to be smelled to be believed. It's really awesome. There's nothing more relaxing in the world than soaking in this stuff and reading a good book for about an hour, and then you get out and you feel like you're just invigorated and like 10 years younger. I never put any stock in stuff like bath salts and Epsom salt until I actually started using it, and wow, it's awesome stuff. So I also want to give a shout out to Lori. She's been on the podcast several times, and she's going to be joining us tonight in the show. But she just recently launched a amazing line of all natural jams, jellies, and preserves. I've tried several of them, and it just doesn't even do it justice. I absolutely love this flavor she's got called Manganero. It's mangoes and habanero. And she dials down the heat. It's not overpowering, though I'm from Texas. I asked her for her version of the extra hot, which is just killer. She also has this blueberry blast flavor that is so good I actually have to hide it in the fridge from my daughter, because I'll just come home and the whole jar will be empty and I won't get any of it. The blueberry blast is just amazing. So definitely go check her out. Her project is up at lonestarjams.com. So the last thing I want to talk about before we jump into the interview is it's actually very closely related to what we're going to be talking about tonight and the story we're going to be talking about. So we're going to talk to John and Deborah and their family, and they worked a case, or they were the clients in a case we worked last year, and this is just such a heart-wrenching story. It's, man, I just can't even say enough about their courage and their resolve for what they've been through and how they've been able to come through this. It's really heartwarming. So they were a large reason why we started this organization called Spirit Remediation Consultants. You can go to the website, spiritremediation.com. So here's what we're doing. We have noticed in our group through Houston Ghost Research, and me and Tony and Lori sit down and we talk about cases like this, and we realize there's nobody out there really training paranormal investigators and other groups on how to deal with the legitimate spiritual side of paranormal investigation. There's plenty of people who talk about how to do the capturing video and recording evidence and documentation and research and all that stuff. But there are so few groups out there who legitimately deal with the spiritual aspect of it. So that's one of the strong suits of our group, Houston Ghost Research. We've developed a practice that we call spirit remediation based off of our study materials and reading lists and spiritual perspectives and outlooks. So we decided to sort of spin off Houston Ghost Research into this separate organization called Spirit Remediation Consultants. And my background is actually, my professional background is in IT management, and specifically in online courses in higher education and online course development and system administration. So I have tons of experience dealing with online courses. So what I did was I took the learning program and the study program that I developed for Houston Ghost Research, and I'm porting all of this over into an online course that is going to be offered through this organization we're putting together called Spirit Remediation Consultants. And you're going to be able to pay for and go through this online course. It's and when I say online course, I'm not joking. The amount of material that you have to go over and that's required that you pass in this course is pretty substantial. If you were to rate it on an academic scale, it would easily rate between 6 and 8 credit hours. We're going to give you plenty of time to go through this course. It's going to be all self-paced. And for the first couple of rounds of students who go through this and who are patient with us and help us work out the bugs that are obviously going to float up in this course, we're going to give a pretty substantial discount to. So if you're interested in learning the Houston Ghost Research method and approach for spirit remediation that we're going to talk about in this story, and our philosophy, and it's almost like you're a member of HGR. We're putting together this online program through this organization, and if you pass the online course, you're actually going to get a certification. You're going to be a spirit remediation certified paranormal investigator through our organization. We're going to post your info and profile up on the website so that you can verify and other people can verify that you've been through this course and you've passed it successfully. So this next part is very, very important. If you are interested in doing this, you have to be on our mailing list, because only the folks that are on our mailing list are going to get access to the discounted rate for the first couple of groups of students. So if you're interested in this, even if you decide later not to do it, you got to be on this list for it to be available. Go to spiritremediation.com and sign up on the list. There's tons of info on what we're doing, background on me and our group, and you'll see what we're trying to build here. This is obviously not, for me, it's not about making money. It's about getting this information out there. But there is a ton of time that goes into not only creating and developing an online course and adminning this organization we're putting together. I want this to be a very hands-on, interactive experience in the course, so it's going to be very time-consuming, and time ain't cheap. So go to spiritremediation.com if you're interested. Sign up, learn more about what we're trying to put together there. Definitely check out Lori's project she's got going on. I love her stuff. Manganero and Blueberry Blast are just both heavenly. And her website is LoneStarJams.com. And obviously, if you're interested in the Ormus samples or the natural soaps and bath products my wife and I are putting together in this separate company, go check out BlueRoseAlchemy.com. So let's jump in really quick into the interview, but let me give you a little bit of background information first, so you know the frame of reference where this is coming from and what this story is about. Our guests tonight are Debbie Chestnut. She's joining us because she was involved in this case. She's been on the podcast a couple of times. She's a spiritual medium and paranormal investigator. She's got her own group, Rolling Up North. She definitely knows what she's talking about and what she's doing. Lori Nelson from LoneStarMedium.com, been on the podcast a couple of times. Very knowledgeable spiritual medium and expert in remote viewing. She's our sort of eyes and ears on the as far as gathering information. So our guests tonight are two people who are really very close to my heart, and you'll see why. These folks have been through an unbelievable experience. We're simply going to refer to them as John and Deborah. We need to keep their IDs private because they have their own lives, and they want to share their story, but they need to be independent. They're two former clients of our group, Houston Ghost Research. They're going to share their story and that of their 14-year-old son, Jack, and their family and what they've been through. What they've been able to overcome is really nothing short of remarkable. Last year, Jack fell very ill with this mysterious illness, is the only way to put it. They took him to every doctor they could find, every specialist they could find, and even to a therapist. Nobody could find out what was going on with Jack. As they were looking for answers, his condition began to rapidly deteriorate. They had to remove him from school. He developed double vision. Eventually, he lost his ability to walk. For some time, he was actually forced to get around the house by crawling from room to room. That was the only way he could even get around their home. So after exhausting every medical avenue they could find, they eventually started wondering if some of the odd things that were going on with Jack wasn't rooted in a spiritual issue. He'd been plagued with nightmares. He'd been hearing voices. He got to the point where, Jack's 14 years old. He'd refused to sleep in his own room alone. He was so terrified, even sleeping with his parents in his parents' room, he still insisted on sleeping with a pocket knife just to make himself feel safer. He was just absolutely terrified. So after some spiritual intervention and guidance, and we got involved in the case, and we worked with Debbie Chestnut, Jack is back on track. He's doing very well. He's moving forward. But the story of Jack and John and Deborah and their other kids and their family is just something we want to devote an entire episode to. Very possibly one of the most dire cases we've ever been involved in as a group, and helping Jack and Deborah and John through this process has been a privilege for us, and we're honored to have been involved. But this story needs to get out there. There are other families who hopefully are dealing with, not this dire of a circumstance, but they need some inspiration. They need to know that there are other people out there dealing with similar issues, and they're not alone. And there are people out there who can help them, not just HGR. So yeah, with that, we're just going to jump into the interview, and I hope you guys enjoy the story. One last note here, folks. Please be patient with the audio. We had 6 people on the call tonight for this interview, and we've never had that many people before. There was some rather distracting background noise that was going on for part of the conversation. I tried to edit that out and minimize it, but the story is well worth suffering through those few moments, and I think you'll probably agree. John, Deborah, how did this, what first kicked off on the radar for you guys to say, hey, something's not right here?
Well, our son had been sick starting in February last year. To be exact, it was February 24th. He got up and had double vision and had been sick pretty much every month with similar like headache, stomach aches, not able to go to school for several days. But in February, it started full on with the double vision, dizziness, and kind of had escalated. And we had him see a doctor a week later, and the doctor said, I think it might be meningitis. So we immediately went to the emergency room. We went through testing, MRIs, CT scans, blood work. And nobody really was able to say what it was. They said, no, it's not really meningitis. And he continued from February on through April every day. He missed every day of school.
Wow.
He could not, we got to the point where he was so dizzy, he couldn't walk. The double vision did not allow him to do anything. Couldn't read a book. Couldn't do anything, but basically just kind of exist. We went round and round to different doctors. We were at specialists at Seattle Children's. Everybody said to us, we can't really pinpoint what he's got. So I remember specifically, John and I were talking about this last night, how John came home one day and he said, well, I heard this podcast.
Well, and even before that, we had kind of talked about, after having exacerbated not only our patients, but also really trying to just figure out everything. We tried every type of doctor as far as going to traditional physicians. Deb even took him, to acupuncturists, to non-Western doctors, naturopaths, etc., as far as trying out different venues. So I had made a joke one night and said, well, we've tried out the physicians and the doctors and even psychiatrists, because we took him to go and see we took him in for every single evaluation possible. Said, there's only one thing that we haven't ruled out, ha ha ha. And by that, we'll lose control of being able to walk. It had gotten to the point where he was more comfortable with quite literally crawling around the house because he was having difficulty standing up because his knees were buckling, because he was unable to stand because of vertigo. And frankly, I started to get worried when I thought of the scene where little Reagan is crawling around the house on her knees backwards. When I would look at Jack and say, oh, that does look like a scene out of a movie. And that's where I started to, I guess, go down the road of trying to explore other thoughts, because I've always been aware of some of the other things and some of the other venues, and it all kind of started to make sense. And like Deb said, that's when one morning on the way into work, I was listening to a podcast. Debbie, that's where I heard you.
I also forgot to mention, Jack was having nightmares. He had nightmares for 23 days in a row.
Wow.
He dreamt every single night that he was dying in some fashion. Something was tearing him apart, something was eating him, something was pestering him, and every single night he was drowning, or and it woke us up, and he woke us up, and it got to the point where he wouldn't even sleep in the room, which is his bedroom, because he's like, I just can't be in there anymore. And so he started to bunk in with us on a pull-out couch, and it was
well, and even
so
then he
disheartening.
And he was always waking up at the same time, regardless as to if it was in there or even if he was in here. It was always around 3 o'clock in the morning, and that, again, because of things that I've known and the things that I've read, that was always a red flag to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It has been less than a year. I think we're still
A little gun shy.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, rightfully so.
That's normal. That's totally normal.
Yeah, especially with what you guys and Jack have been through.
Exactly.
So, just to sort of set the stage for folks who have never heard this story before, who are listening to the podcast, how old is Jack at this point?
Jack is 14. At the time, he was an 8th grader. He's been a normal kid. At the start of this, he was not only on the lacrosse team, he's been an honor student, not only throughout his career, but even last year he was in all honors classes in 8th grade. Boy Scout, he's a Life Scout. He's someone that's been kind of an upstanding type of guy. The reason why I pull out the Scout thing is because I think that that's always been very, very integral, at least to what he has seen, and especially with the connection to the other spirit. And I think that's been something that's been very powerful for the whole family, but definitely for Jack.
So Debbie, they contacted you, and I know when you reached out to us, but what was your initial sort of assessment, and how did you take the case from there?
When I got the email and they told me what was going on, I actually became very alarmed and concerned about Jack, and I got the feeling that if something wasn't done rather quickly, that Jack didn't have much time, but I wasn't sure how he didn't have much time. So, actually, I had just finished your podcast, and we've been talking on and off, after that. And judging by what you told me about your team, I'm like, I'm not equipped. My team is not equipped to handle this. I mean, if they were here and I could get there, I could handle it. And I knew your team did a lot of remote work, so I reached out to you and said, I really need your help on this. And your team kind of took it from there, which was great.
Yeah, we're so lucky to have Lori on board. She's really set the pace for us being able to work remotely.
Yeah, I went there remotely, and I didn't like what I saw, but I knew remotely I just couldn't do it.
So then HGR took over the case and started consulting back and forth with you. And John, correct me if I'm wrong here, but didn't we ask for sort of what we normally do with most remote clients? Didn't we ask for pictures and a handwriting sample and stuff like that?
You did. When things first started off, Debbie, I think you had even asked just for pictures of Jack. And
yes, I did.
I went ahead and I gave Deb a call at home because I think that we exchanged emails, and within the hour you were asking for that, I gave Deb a call at home without even having explained the whole next step that I had taken as far as contacting you and kind of where that was going to go and where it eventually did go. I said, hey, could you, because at this point Jack was staying home from school the entire time. He wasn't
right.
He wasn't physically able to go. I just said, hey, could you take a couple of pictures of Jack? She sent them to me, I sent them off to you, and I think that's where things got started. But
yeah, and then I sent them to James.
Yep. And then we took additional pictures here in the house and got Jack started on the picture that he drew and then he sent off.
Oh, Deborah, so you didn't even know John was getting some crazy folks involved at this particular juncture.
No, I had no idea. In fact, he had mentioned something very briefly that he'd heard a podcast, at least this is my memory, and I was so involved in what was going on with my son and trying to manage all that and just trying to keep life normal that I didn't really have time to rein in what he was doing or where he was going. We were all a little bit on edge, as you can imagine, having a child home for that long, not knowing, constantly being told by doctors, we don't know what's wrong with your child, and having your child diminish right in front of your eyes is horrific. It's just horrific.
It's traumatic.
And you don't know, there's no end in sight. There was nothing. So I really had no idea what John was kind of doing outside of what my daily tasks were.
Well, and also to help set the stage too, and I'm sure we'll get to some of these things later as far as how this may have been around for a long time. But even though Jack was just experiencing these things last year, it's not the first time that there had been a child that we've had that's gone through either some kind of physical or even emotional trauma as far as odd behavior. So, Jack's younger brother, he has kind of gone up and down as far as staying home from school and going to school because he's been a very sensitive person. That's actually something that was just doing some research on the last few days, even a highly sensitive individual, because he's pretty empathic as far as his own kind of demeanor or makeup. His youngest sister, she had some physical issues when she was first born, so there's been kind of an ongoing parental alarm that goes off both Deb and I as far as in the middle of the night, well, somebody's up, better go check on them. But it was when Jax became so consistent that we started to think about other possible alternative ways. And yeah, I didn't necessarily bring things up to Deb right off the bat as to what I was thinking as far as where I thought things were going or what might be the cause. Frankly, because she didn't need the stress, and I wanted to go ahead and kind of do some investigation myself first.
I can only imagine how you guys felt emotionally at that point with seeing Jack go downhill like that. I've got a 14-year-old myself, and I would be beside myself in that situation, taking him to doctor after doctor, and nobody can help. Nobody has any answers for you. Wow. Kudos to you guys for sticking through that stress point. That's incredible.
It's all Deb.
So we got the photos back, and we got sort of initial reports. And what we do on our side of the team, especially with remote clients, is we put together a photo gallery from a new client, and it's an anonymous photo gallery. I post it up, and I send it out to Lori and the other mediums in our team, and we have all the mediums go through each and every photo and do a blind reading on each and every photo. And Keith, I think you were even part of that, weren't you, for that round?
I was. I received all the pictures and went through it just like everyone else in the group on that one.
Yeah. So then once everybody, they don't know anything about the client story, they don't know what's going on at all. I mean, obviously they could draw some sort of context clues from some of the photos, but we don't give any backstory at all. We collect all the readings back, compile them, and see what matches up with the story. So from there, Lori, can you kind of take us through what your initial reading was from the photos, and we can kind of step through it from there?
Well, when I initially went through it, I didn't see a whole lot in the house, and it's kind of a side story on here, too, with that. Well, we'll get to that later. But when I saw Jack, I picked up that he was sensitive, he was sensitive, and he was drawing whatever was around him, was attracted to him. And I think it had latched on. And actually, when I did a remote on him, I saw a real heavy cord attachment looking like it was coming out of the top of his head. And that I never see. Usually, I don't see cord attachments unless somebody's got something, attached to them. But this was a pretty thick one, which told me it had been with him for quite a while. And I didn't pick up any of the physical issues until you had me do the body scan later, which I picked up something with the blood was being affected. And I had asked him to look at his labs and see if his body was absorbing the nutrients, and that could have been causing the problem. And I don't even know, what happened to that, but one thing I did pick up was that big cord attachment.
Yeah, I remember you describing that as a giant straw sort of going through his head. John, Deborah, didn't you guys go back and have some blood tests done based off of that feedback?
Yes.
Do you remember what the results were for that?
They said everything was within normal parameters, which was what we were hearing time and time again from all the doctors. There was nothing to signify any issues whatsoever.
And actually, not only during the times when Jack would wake up in the middle of the night, terrified, but even then by the time that we contacted you, because it was, I think a month and a half, 2 months after things started as far as the regular basis here, Jack would say that he would see some kind of dark shadow or some kind of figure in the corner of the room up towards the ceiling, just sitting there watching him, and he would always describe it as some kind of a dark shadow or some kind of I think that he did say at one point almost a spider-like kind of figure. But then when he drew the picture that we ended up sending you, it was something totally different.
Right, I remember
And
that.
I did say to Jack, what's going on? This isn't what you have described to me. This is something else. But he just said, this is what I see. This is what I've always said I see.
So we sort of left this out of the initial scene setting. You guys, what was the timeline between what was going on with Jack and you guys moving into the new house?
Oh, as far as being in the house, we actually moved into the house in 2001. Yeah.
So you guys had been in the house for quite a while.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the bedroom that Jack was in, that used to be his older sister's room, and then he moved into that room. I guess he was in there for
2012. He moved into that room, right?
Yeah, so a year and a half before things started to get stranger for him, so to speak.
Didn't you say that your daughter had felt some weird stuff in that room before Jack moved in there?
Yes.
She did, and it was kind of interesting because she reminded us of that when we were all sitting down, kind of the night when everything exploded, the night that everything went shall we say, sideways. When we were talking about things, she said, after she even saw the picture that Jack had drawn, she said, "Oh, that guy." "What?" "Oh, that guy. Yeah, don't you remember? I told you about him. He's the one that used to give me all the story." So our daughter, our oldest, she's, when we talk about writers, she's actually a published writer because when she was in junior high, she was just a prolific author as far as writing short stories, writing poetry, writing things, and it was one of those things where she probably said something to me when she was young. "Oh, really? Oh, okay." But she had said that there was some guy that would come and visit her from her closet and tell her stories, and she would write them down. And she never had any kind of issues like Jack.
That was the warrior, right? That was the one
that was the warrior, right.
The warrior would tell her the stories, not the thing in the corner.
Right.
Yeah, so to sort of circle back to the photo reading, it's interesting that you brought up the fact that he was talking about spiders in the corner of his room, because that was one of the few things I picked up off the photos. I got two strong impressions from the photo reading, and my reading doesn't really count because I'm working with you guys and I know the story, so I always put a large grain of salt in there. But the big thing I picked up with Jack is he when I look at Jack, I get two distinct personalities, two completely separate entities. Not in the sense of there are multiple personalities, but in the sense that there are two presences attached or within Jack. Say that again?
Is it because he's a Gemini?
No, I think it was, and this is very typical of a pre-possession haunting that's progressed as far as Jack's had. It's what I pick up is Jack inside his body, and I pick up by proxy the other entity that's connected to him. So I don't perceive it the same way Lori does, where there's an actual cord or a connection. I've never been very good at that, but I can definitely pick up two distinct personalities. And the other thing I picked up, other than two personalities off of that photo of Jack, was in his room something to do with spiders. And that's when you had keyed up and you had shared the fact that he had said there was some spider guy hanging out in his corner. And at first I thought maybe it was just some sort of weird other astral, I hate using this because it sounds so cheesy, some sort of astral critter on the other side that he was seeing because he was obviously sensitive. But there was something a little more sinister at play, and it was really difficult for us to lock onto. Lori, you kind of want to take us into that when we finally got John and Deborah on the phone and we did the reading and we finally figured out what was really going on?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the spider, though, because I had several people on the team pick up on this spider thing. I could not see the spider. I couldn't find anything. Not even a clue. And I didn't know it was a spider. James never mentioned what it was, but I just couldn't see it. And then when I found out that it was a spider-like creature, and I found out through this other entity, I'm going to say it's American Indian, the guy who was taking care of the land that the property was on. That's what I was feeling. Almost like a protector. I kind of started a communication with him to find out what was going on. And I had one heck of a time convincing James that this guy was who he was. And I think finally he saw it. But I got a couple of words from him, and one was canid, K-A-N-I-D. And I didn't know what that meant. So I kind of went on Google and spelled it out how I heard it, and it came up spider. And I told James what that was, and he said, oh, well, that's what I've been seeing. I said, well, that's no wonder I haven't seen it because I have a severe phobia of spiders, so I probably wouldn't have seen it even if it had been there. So that made a whole lot of sense. And then I started this communication back and forth with this Native American fellow who you just confirmed with me that your daughter had gotten stories from him, so he wasn't a threat. And I couldn't get my point across strong enough that he wasn't a threat, that he was there, in my opinion, to protect. And I think he did a lot to protect the family, but I think Jack was just so sensitive that spider thing latched on. Not only that, but when the spider feeds, he gets a connection, and he feeds and poisons at the same time. And I think that's what was going on with Jack. He was being fed off and also nourishing this spider thing.
So we were actually on the phone at one point, if you can think back, with these guys, and right in the middle of the call, you were projecting over to their house, and that's when you picked up the actual entity that was the problem. Yeah, you want to go into the description of him?
Yeah, he was a tall, slender, smoky fellow, and he moved like smoke, like a shadow would, but he had like if you want to picture a cape following somebody, it was a cape, but it was smoke. And he was trapped in a particular room, if I remember right, and couldn't get out of there. And I'm not exactly sure why or what the dynamics were, or why he was stuck in that room. But eventually, he was able to break free of that. And honestly, that's all I remember. But it was a tall, slender fellow, kind of like, well, I named him Slim because he was real tall. And I think that's when Debbie Chestnut, you had recognized that particular thing.
Yes, I actually had 3 entities in the house when I went there. Yeah, I had the Shadow Man,
right,
with the smoke that you, and then I had the Warrior, as their daughter called him, and then I had something else there, and I hadn't at that point figured out what it was because I think there was more than one at work there. And I think that's why the Warrior was having such a hard time trying to protect, is because he was fighting more than he could handle.
Right, and I think the Slim one was trapped there, if I remember.
The Slim one was trapped there, and then there was the Warrior, and then there was the other one.
Right.
So at this point, I looped Akelta in, who's been on the podcast a couple of times. She works with darker entities, and she has the ability to work remotely as well. She was able to connect and get a better look at the hose or the cord or the connection that was going into Jack, and she traced it back to the Slim guy, as I recall, that Lori picked up. And turns out, and this is her definition, what she calls it in her practice, a sludge entity. Sort of not really even what she would consider a demon. They have a sort of cunning-like intelligence, to use her description of them, but they're essentially just sort of predatory malice and entropy personified. And that was apparently what had very deeply tunneled into Jack and made a connection and was feeding on him to the point where I believe, in her words, she'd never seen that much damage on somebody who was actually still alive. Wow. Yeah, it was a pretty bad connection. Now it's okay for me to talk about that with you guys, but I didn't want to shake you up too much and say that. But yeah, it was. So Akelta have had some experience in dealing with some of these guys remotely before. Apparently, in her practice in working with the darker side of the spectrum, they run into these guys on a regular basis because they like to come up and impersonate other entities and trick people who don't know what's going on into working with them, and then they attach to them and feed off of them, and it goes into sort of a downward spiral. So we sort of set up, because Jack was in such need, we normally go through a little more extensive process. We set up a plan to, within the next week, to do both a remote cleansing and a detachment. My team set up the remote cleansing ceremony to be able to blow anything and all the entities that were involved out of the house, and worked with John and Deborah to set up a protective ward over the house. And then at the same time, Akelta came in remotely, removed the attachment, and repaired as much of the damage as she could. John, apparently that night was pretty eventful for you guys. You care to elaborate on how that all went down from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, that was the big day. I got the call from Deb. I'll let her walk through 90% of it, and then when we had a longer conversation with the family when we were off site, when we gave you a call that night, that's when we found out some interesting things too.
So as your team prepared to do something, I believe, James, if I recall correctly, you had stated it'd be towards the end of the week, and we didn't quite make it. I think you guys were going to do a Friday or Saturday, and we didn't quite make it all the way to the end there because things started to ramp up so badly around Jack in the house. We had all kinds of strange things. All of the electronic emails that I had in my computer, anything regarding Jack, duplicated. All emails, everything duplicated. We had machines in the house that were not working.
Well, and anytime that Jack walked across a threshold to leave the house,
yes,
that's when he would pretty much fall over.
Yeah, he had to have two people support him as he walked as he walked through any threshold to the house, any door, any garage door, any threshold to the house, he would buckle completely.
So basically, every time he left any room, there was a change physically in him?
Not the rooms, but if you go from inside the house to outside the house, any threshold.
Oh, okay.
Between inside and outside, he would buckle so badly it would take myself and John, or would take myself and another person to support him because his knees would buckle so badly.
Man.
So we had all of this going on, and I don't remember how it ended up being Thursday, but I do remember...
You guys were playing apples to apples or something like that?
Well, the house, it was a lot of agitation in the house. So I had my daughter, my oldest, home from college. She was on spring break, and we were all in the house. John was at work, but it was palpable. We were all agitated with each other. Not for necessarily anything reasonable, but you could just tell we were all kind of cranky with each other. Things just were not right. And so my kids were playing apples to apples in the dining room, and Jack was following me around, and I was trying to do things around the house, and every time I turned around, he was just there, and I got really agitated, and you can tell I'm really agitated right now, too. I feel that so badly. So I kind of told him to back off. I said, well, I just want to make sure you're okay. And he's like, well, set. And then he tried to sit with the other kids who were playing. So that requires you reading pieces off of cards, and he was having a hard time with that. Again, he had 100% double vision. So he, at one point, was following me to the kitchen, and he says to me, "Did you say something?" I said, "What?" And he said, "Did you say something to me?" And I said, "No, I didn't say anything." And he got up kind of close to me, and all of a sudden he goes, "Stop it! Stop it!" And I just looked at him like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I am not stupid! I am not stupid!" And he slid down the cabinet, landed on the floor. And I said, "Jack, what is going on?" He's like, "It's in my head. It's in my head. It's telling me I'm stupid." "You're not stupid, Jack. You are not stupid." And I put my hands over his head because he was at this point sitting on the floor. And I just, as you instructed us, James, you were telling us to just invoke Michael the Archangel, all of the angels of light, God the Father. You know, I put my hands on that child and just invoked every possible piece of light I could possibly invoke into this child, and just said, you know, "You belong to me, you are mine, I claim you as mine, get out." I just was on that child with my hands on him. My oldest daughter came in from the dining room. She came over. I had never instructed her to do this. She put her hands on his head. My two younger children came in. They did not say a word. And one of my children is very inquisitive, and she needs to ask a lot of questions all the time. And she just watched us. And we prayed. We prayed the Our Father. Just all come protect us and save us, help Jack, and it was about, it seemed a lot longer, but I'm sure it was probably more like 5 minutes maybe, just standing there with our hands on his head. And he said it was painful when that thing was talking to him. His head was just pounding. But after the 5 minutes, he was able to stand up and just kind of all hugged. We all kind of hugged. And
well, he had said beforehand, I remember talking that night about it, he was saying that his head, on a pain scale, he said that it was at a 10, but then by the time that all this was over, it was at about a 3.
So had he ever complained or talked about hearing voices before that particular event?
He had, and quite honestly, I had heard them too. Putting him to bed sometimes at night, the way that I had described it to him, he said, yeah, it sounded like what I was hearing too. It's almost as if I thought that the neighbors had on the TV set too loud. I could hear something, especially while putting him to bed. Sometimes at night when he would say that he was having bad dreams, I'd go in there and I'd hear something. But, our neighbors, they're kind of night owls. They've always been the type that stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning anyway. The common joke is, it must be garbage night because we can hear them at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's when they're taking their trash out.
Right. How much of this, of what my team had shared with you, John and Deborah, how much of this had you shared with the kids and the family? How much were they aware of?
With Jack, absolutely nothing. That was one of the things that you had told us to do, because basically, to put it in these terms, he was compromised, and therefore anything that he heard, other things might hear as well. So Jack was aware of any of this. Our oldest, we had talked with her about it to a small extent from the standpoint that she was home. She said, hey, we're talking to some of these people because we're trying to figure out exactly what's going on with Jack. And she just kind of said, okay. She didn't really question it. She's always been supportive, and our kids they've always been very open. We've always been very honest with them about everything that's going on. They never question anything. So when Deb went ahead and got down to help out Jack, everybody just immediately pitched in. And the funny part that I hearing it later on is that as soon as they were done with the hook, everybody just went back about their normal business. Everybody sat down, kept on playing apples to apples. It's as if nothing really happened. Everyone was just kind of happy to go.
Except for the fact that feeling, that agitation was gone.
Yeah, it's amazing how you invoke some angelic energy and it just completely cleans house. That's very typical, but man, not to that degree. It's very rare that it's not rare that before a cleansing or before we get heavily involved in a case, but especially before we do a cleansing, that activity spikes a lot. And I was concerned with how that was going to react with Jack and how that was going to play out with him, because we knew the date was coming up. We were going to do it. But I was hoping he wasn't going to have such a hard time. But even without the kids knowing what was going on, he still had a very intense episode. Would you guys say that was probably the most intense you guys had ever seen him?
Oh,
I think during the day, yes, but that's about the extent that he would get to. One thing that we didn't mention before, Jack, really from about February forward, he was sleeping every night with one of his pocket knives in bed because he was terrified to go to sleep. He was terrified to go to bed.
That poor kid, man.
He was also, I think we forgot to mention too, he was also vomiting every night.
Yeah.
3 or 4 times a night.
Yeah, it was doing some pretty serious neurological damage to him from what we could tell. So yeah, based on that event, I think that's when we decided to go ahead and step up the cleansing from that weekend to that Thursday night. That's when we actually got to work and did the ritual, and I contacted Akelta and said we're moving up the timetable.
Well, James, even before that, just because it was so dramatic on our end, we went out for dinner that night as a family. That's when we all started to talk about it, and that is when we started to share with Jack a little bit as to what was going on. what was interesting is that independently we were talking with each of the other kids, kind of giving them okay, here's kind of what happened this afternoon. And that's when our oldest, when she shared, oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, I remember that.
So that was sort of your family put all the cards on the table discussion?
Exactly. And Jack's younger brother, so out of the picture that Jack drew, he drew that I guess man, again, it was probably the warrior, but he drew that figure that was standing there with this huge, almost anime-type sword that had that large hilt and a knob on the end of it. And I had asked Jack when we were sitting there at dinner, I said, tell me about this. Well, it's this huge metal sword. It's a big leather handle, and at the end there's this big red gem. I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. He was on the other side of the table. He then started to talk with Deb and his sister. I then turned to Jack's brother, and I said, and he hadn't heard any of that. He didn't hear anything about the picture because he was in his own conversation. He was totally separate. And like brothers, they talk to each other about things, typically either video games or something about school. They weren't talking about any of this kind of stuff. I said to his brother, I said, so tell me, you've been sleeping through a lot of this stuff. You've been unaware. Has anything weird been happening to you? And he told me that he did have one really weird dream a few weeks before that, where he was sitting there. He was in a completely white room. He was dressed all in white, and he was staring in a mirror. And suddenly this dark figure, this shadow came up behind him. Then he grabbed the sword that was suddenly next to him. And he described the exact same sword that Jack had drew in his picture, except the gem. He grabbed the sword, he spun that shadow in half. The shadow disappeared, and the gem that was on the end of the sword went from red to green.
Wow. So
he described virtually the exact same thing that Jack had as far as the sword, and the only thing that kind of came through our minds at the time is that not only is this thing trying to protect all of them, but also it's not trying to do it for them, it's trying to give them the tools to protect themselves.
Trying to empower them.
Right. Sister was able to do that, his younger brother was able to do that, but Jack was not able to do that, and that's why that entity was trying to help out Jack as far as the warrior went. But all those things we then shared with you that night, and that's when we got on the phone with you. And I think that was, at least from when we talked with you, I think that was the first time that it had the vision of Slim, I think it was Kitchen or something like that. Even
Wow. So, Lori, would you say the appearance of this sword is probably related to this protective Native American guy who's hanging around?
Yes. And I'll tell you why. When I looked at the picture, that was the first impression I got, that he was not a bad guy. He was a protector because his sword was not in his hand, number one. Number two, it was in the ground, like he had claimed that space, territory. Then it was, in the ground, that he was there and he was claiming that as his. Also, I think it was interesting, this is the first time I've heard about the younger brother's dream. I mean, I think I'd heard about it, but not to that detail. So, the top of the sword being red, like a danger signal, and turning around and cutting him in half, and all of a sudden it's green, and yeah, go. That's the way it's supposed to be. And
yeah, I think it's interesting how when kids have dreams like that, some people might dismiss them and say, "Oh, it's just a kid having an arbitrary dream." But isn't it interesting how things like that line up perfectly with the red and the green? It all makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and two kids having the same dream, but they hadn't discussed it prior.
Right.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with dreams, there's so much stuff that comes in from the subconscious and so many symbols and different ways to interpret it, but you see the common themes that are going on. This one entity showing up with this sword that could either be considered, a threat, or it sounded like this guy was trying to give the people who were being affected a means to defend themselves.
Right, and the fact that it was in a white room, I've had similar dreams of being in just a white, pristine square room with just myself and another person, and those typically are visitation dreams. That's not a dream that your subconscious is working through or sending you messages or helping you work through your daily lives, the prior to 3 days before. That's an actual vivid dream that someone came to him in that dream trying to show him or give him an answer.
Right. And that's very typical of entities like this, where it sounds like, he had definitely got his claws into Jack, so to speak, very deeply, and he was probably trying to set somebody else up to be the next victim. And I would assume that's probably why his brother had that visitation dream.
Yep.
So I think you guys were out to dinner, and we had that conversation that we were just talking about. And were y'all out of the house when we started the cleansing ritual, or were y'all, John, were you and Deborah in the house? What was the situation at that point?
No, we were out of the house. We actually went to 2 different restaurants. The first one we couldn't get a table, and quite honestly, we used that as air cover so that Deb could go outside and talk to you guys on the phone while I was in there with the kids. We were waiting for a table. And then we just transitioned over to another restaurant, and by that point, that's when we got the call back from you saying that you all had done the remote into the house and had finally seen kind of hit pay dirt, as it were, as far as what was the source of it. And that's when, I think that's when you said you were going to start things up right then and there.
Yeah, Lori, that's when we were on the phone and you finally got a clear lock on to Slim. And the way we work, once we can clearly identify what the entity is, that even if just one of us sees a remote picture, that gives us something to lock onto and a target. So we just dubbed him Slim at that particular point and made him the focus of the ritual. So we did a binding ritual on him and removed him and invoked Michael and asked Michael to remove him from the house. And literally, we just dropped sort of an angelic bomb on the property. And so can you guys from that point, what was it like when y'all walked back into the house? What happened at that particular point when y'all returned back home?
Well, actually, again, some of the things started to fade into memory. I think that as you put it, even at the time, nuking it from orbit, that may have happened the next day because we did come back. We all came back. We all slept in the same room. But the first thing that we did when we came back in, we went around and we did a smudge. We took out all of the incense. We mixed that and we started to go around the house and we started to burn it. First off, it wouldn't light. Even with the charcoal stick, it wouldn't take. It finally did after a long time. But what was interesting, so our oldest daughter, she was following us around, kind of watching things while it was happening. She said when we would come into rooms, especially into our bedroom, Deb's in my bedroom because it's got the access up to the attic, which kind of seemed to be a big central point for this. When we came in here, we did the smoke, and she said that it went up about 6 feet. Ceilings are about 8 feet, but it went up to about 6 feet, and then it just stalled out. Smoke would just into the room, and it just kind of hung there, almost as, like a Jacques Cousteau specials. You would see the different layers of water. That was about what the air looked like.
Yeah, I remember once we had locked onto that guy, it really seemed like he was nesting. He had sort of made his home in the attic, and when he wasn't downstairs with you guys, that's where he actually was, where he was hanging out. And Lori, didn't you pick up once we actually went into the attic remotely? Didn't you pick up that he had a couple of other entities locked up there with him?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was hoping you would get to this. I named the warrior Tonto, okay? Nothing racial or anything like that. That's just my name for him. That's what I called him so I could identify to him. But he had warriors. He had people on that land that were trapped up in that attic. And through no fault of their own, I don't even know how they would have gotten trapped there, but his people were trapped. I had gone in a couple of days ahead of time when I knew that we were going to do this big blowout because I didn't want anything harm coming to the warrior. I told him kind of gave him a heads up of what we were going to do. He told him, look, if you want to be in there, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. But we're going to do this. So if you can get out and get your people out of there if there's any in there. And I had seen, I want to say upwards 6, 7, 8 trapped spirits up in there. But they were released, and he told me that when after that angelic intervention took place, that his people were released. And the big image that he gave me, I asked him what else that the homeowners could do to protect that land or to clear that land. All he did was turn around and face west. And my impression of facing west is sunset. It's done. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I was getting from him.
So, yeah, it's almost like this guy was corralling this slim character was corralling these other entities and had been collecting them up there. And your impression, too, was that this had been going on a long time before John and Deborah even got the house, right?
Yeah, it was a land thing. Yes, it was a land thing.
Laura, I can't remember if some of this came from you as far as me looking into the history. I've always been a history buff. I have always tried to find out history of different places, and I think that either at that time or shortly thereafter, I found out more about our town. It's a town in Washington State. As far as this part of the land, it's right next to a lake. At one end of the lake, historically, that's where the Native American tribe was, the big tribe in the area. The other end, I think it's part of that tribe set. You could throw a rock and you could hit a different tribe out here. That's how many tribes. The other end of the lake, though, and we're kind of in the crossroads between the two. The other end of the lake was where all the outcasts were always sent. So it may have been something that went back that far. As far as the house itself, it was built in the late 70s. We only met one person that was from the original neighborhood. They were next door, and they had told us many, not really strange stories, but just lots of drama stories about people that lived in this house with other people that lived in the neighborhood. So there were always kind of some neighborhood politics types of things. But when we first heard those stories, we kind of wrote them all off. But when we started to hear that things had been here for a long time, it's almost as if a lot of the pieces of the puzzle as to the drama, even in the neighborhood, started to fall together in place. Before we had bought the house, I think we mentioned before, it had been vacant for a year, and it was a rental for 10 years before that. And as far as some of the things that we had been told went on when it was a rental, there were some pretty, shall we say, it was very welcome to have us in the neighborhood to go ahead and not have some things that were going on in the rental house going on. So there may have been some bad vibes going on at that point even still.
Well, hopefully the cleansing did some good for the neighborhood in general. If a lot of that was not localized just to your house, but to the whole neighborhood, I would hope that would have helped out. Can you go into after we did the initial remote cleansing and pulled this thing off of Jack? Can you go into what that was like for you guys and what you picked up on your side of the fence?
Laughter. Lots of laughter, lots of smiles, it was a different feel altogether. It was night and day. It was just happiness, joy, and light. I think you had mentioned that we would feel this kind of euphoria, and it was true. It was most definitely true. I didn't ever want it to go away. I wanted it all the time.
Well, and within 24 hours, Jack was able to walk again.
Yeah. He didn't stumble through the thresholds.
Wow. What was his knowledge as far as what we were going to do at that particular juncture?
He knew that something was going on, and we were going to tell him the full story after the fact, but that you guys were out there, and that there were going to be some prayers done that was going to help him out. That was about the extent of it.
Wow.
What was also very interesting, again, this one kind of fell back to the corner memory. When we came home and when we did that cleansing after we lit everything, Jack didn't know what we were doing. He knew that something was up, but he didn't know what we were doing. We went ahead and we set off the incense and we started to even just wave it by him and start to say some prayers. He immediately turned to the sink and threw up.
Oh yeah, that's not uncommon. It was still attached to him at that point. Yeah. Man, my heart goes out to him. That is just such a miserable state to be in.
And when you were telling that story, I would kind of get what's going on when you were talking about the feeling of euphoria. What that was is you had all these negative emotions you've been experiencing for such a long time. So by contrast, when you finally got to go over to the lighter side of the spectrum emotionally, it makes a huge change.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It was, like I said, I'd take it back in an instant. It was the best.
Well, it's just an angelic invocation. That's all you got to do is pull them in and say, hey, can you clean house, get rid of all this negative energy and emotional stuff. And, it builds up over time, just as people, you have a bad day at work or stuff's not going great at the family and all that emotional pollution just sort of hangs out. If you do a quick little invocation prayer and ask all that stuff to be wiped away, it makes a huge difference.
So consider the land. I mean, all the years and years, and you've had earlier battles, and you've had all the negative emotions and everything that had probably never been cleaned out. And, you know, the concentration of the negative emotions probably attracted some of those darker entities, too. It was probably far overdue.
Yeah, especially considering what had gone on in the land. That may have been what originally attracted that sludge entity to there, just all that commiseration going on. So, John, Deb, let's talk a little bit about aftercare. After we'd done the remote cleansing and we pulled Slim off of Jack and got rid of him, I had you guys go through a very simple warding ritual. Can you give us a brief explanation of what that was like for you guys? And
I think the first thing we did after we got all of the books that you recommended that we get, we read through all of those, and at the same time, that's when we also got the medallions. Deb, I know that you picked them up.
St. Joseph.
St. Joseph medallions. We picked up 4 of those. We put those at 4 different corners of the property here in the house. When we came in, one of the things that Deb was in charge of taking care of getting everything out as far as out of Jack. I was in charge of putting up the defensive net, so to speak. So after we took the medallions, we buried them, that's when we had talked through this, but that's when I put up the barrier. Not only said prayers, but also just envisioned, spiritually speaking, a barrier connecting all those 4 points, basically creating first a dome on top and then a dome underneath. And then, since I didn't want to have to deal with this again, I started to spin it just to make sure to get things off as quickly as possible. It was all about creating that protective area so that not only the healing could start within it, but also things would stay out of it. I did put the caveat in invoking that protective barrier that if there are still good spirits here that are doing work to protect and cleanse the land and to heal it, that they are welcome, but they are only welcome as long as they're here to do good for us, for our family, and for the land that we're only here temporarily on.
so how is Jack doing now? Sort of immediately afterwards, I know you guys said he felt great. Any more doctor visits? How's he doing in school? That sort of stuff.
Jack is doing awesome. He started school in September. He spent the summer kind of recuperating, getting his life back together, kind of being able to see again properly and walk again properly. And so, yeah, he started off the school year as a freshman in high school, and he's doing phenomenally well.
Yeah, a year ago, we talked through everything that he was doing a year ago. This past Friday, his big drama is that he went in to go and ask his math teacher if next year he could take 2 classes so that he could make sure to be in the advanced calculus class by the time that he's a senior. So he's completely back to where he was before. It's total night and day. Yeah.
I think the only part we really feel, I don't know what the word is, but we're not able to really share our story with anyone. I shared this story with a friend who I thought would be able to handle the information, and she, when I was telling her the story, she seemed fine with it, but then proceeded to prevent her children from coming over here and prevent interaction with us and things like that. So I think that's been the downside for us a little bit, because we were so happy when things were taken care of, and we wanted to kind of go out and yell it from the from the rafters, right? We wanted to go out and share and kind of tell everybody what we've been through, and it's been unfortunate that we haven't really had an outlet to feel welcomed by, but we're dealing with it.
Yeah, it's difficult to find people to relate to when you've been through something this personal and this traumatic. A lot of people just don't have any frame of reference for that kind of experience.
I'm just glad that everything worked out, and I am so proud of you guys for really taking the bull by the horns, so to speak, and helping us help you and Jack. And I couldn't be happier that he's doing as well as he is.
I'm just really thankful that we were able to help him, and I feel honored and blessed to be, part of his healing. And thank you for whoever worked this out, that we were allowed to be involved in this. This is just amazing.
We couldn't have done it without all of you.
You know, a special, I know I've said this before, but a special kudos to John and you, Deborah, especially seeing Jack collapse like that. We've had clients in the past who have been in not as dire circumstances, but in relatively bad circumstances, and they're just not ready to step up to the challenge, and we can't do it all for them, especially a remote client. You guys just knocked it out of the park, you know.
They did. They were amazing through this whole thing. I can't even imagine being a parent myself, what it was like for you, but...
Yeah, you guys were outstanding, truly. I hope somehow this story gets out and you can share what you guys have been through. And that's part of the reason I wanted you guys on the podcast.
Well, no matter what, we can never say thank you enough to all of you from the standpoint that not only, you know, when you finally realize what's going on, even in the back of your mind, who do you turn to? Who do you ask to go ahead and say something like that? They lock you up in a padded room. But,
well, John, one thing you did too that I think is a real courageous thing is you weren't afraid when you got to the point where you knew it wasn't just something physical. You weren't afraid to say, okay, I know it's something else. I'm going to call somebody about this. Like you're saying, it takes a lot of courage to do that.
It does.
Well, and Debbie, I think I even shared this with you at first. You were the second person that I reached out to, and that's only because here in Seattle, I figured, it's Seattle, it's the left coast. There's gonna be a phone book. I actually did find some kind of, it was a parapsychologist that was in the phone book, and I called up and I talked to them. They seemed really interested, and then I said, you know, and he's 13. Oh no, thanks for calling. Bye.
Wow.
They had no capacity, let alone knowledge as to what to do with that. I knew that it was something that I thought was right because, again, just stepping through everything that he had gone through, that I was experiencing as far as hearing and seeing things myself. But again, without all of you, Deb and I were talking about this last night. We went out and we ironically went to the same restaurant and had a few ciders ourselves. I think that it's pretty clear that at very least there was a high chance that we would have lost Jack, and if not Jack, one or more of the other kids, because this thing would have kept on coming. And Lord only knows what would have happened to the two of us, both in terms of our sanity, let alone some of the other things that you hear about in the news all the time. Words cannot express how grateful we are.
We're really happy to have been able to.
We're just happy to help.
Yeah. And you know, we're going to do another show relatively soon on a related subject. There are a lot of people in the world who are misdiagnosed as having mental issues or schizophrenia or serious physical and mental issues, who genuinely have a spiritual problem. And there's just such a lack of expertise from people who are qualified and have the skill set to be able to deal with that. It's a real problem. You know, me as and my wife, who's a sensitive too, she walks through as a nurse a mental health ward, and you can just see the entities attached to people. You know, some people don't have anything attached and they still have issues. They have legitimate mental and chemical issues, but a lot of what we've seen is reported as a medical or mental issue, and it's really a spiritual issue. So there's a grave need for people who really need to get that knowledge set, which is part of the reason why I'm trying to put together spiritmediation.com to try to help other groups get up to speed on our methods and our techniques and get them certified with how we work. So yeah, I'm really glad our paths crossed, and I think there was probably that was probably divine intervention that you guys were able to find us and we were able to help you guys.
Absolutely.
And I'm just glad that John and Deborah had such an open mind and came searching for help, and I'm just thankful that they found me and I knew James and could help them.
Yeah. So unless anybody has anything else sort of in closing, we'll probably wrap it up there.
No, I think the only other thing that, you know, Deb and I have talked about, or if there's anything that we can ever do, not only to help anyone else that's in need, but we would love to be able to help other people that are in the same type of situation. I look at it this way. I was probably open to all of this because even as a kid, I think it was a friend of mine that had passed along a copy of the book that the Warrens had written many years ago, and that's where I first went, oh, okay, some of this stuff is real.
That's interesting you brought up the Warrens because there were a few parallels between the recent movie The Conjuring and the things that happened with you and with Jack, such as not letting him leave the house. That was a big parallel right there. I don't know if you guys saw The Conjuring or not, but there was a scene where the entity had a hold of the wife and would not let her leave the house.
Yeah, it's interesting. Beforehand, I was open to watching a lot of those movies. I haven't seen a lot of them since.
It's a little too close to home now, I imagine.
Yeah.
But no, if there's ever anything that we can do or any kind of, I guess, testimonial we can provide, we would love to participate in that. And unfortunately, it's too bad that we all live so far away.
I'm trying to get your story out too. You probably got the biggest chapter in the book, and Debbie's encouraged me to submit it to a publisher. So I'm in the process of writing up a proposal to send the manuscript to the publisher, and see where that goes. And
we always accept payment in brownies and baked goods as well. Okay, we'll probably wrap it up there.
Well, you guys take care.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
We can't thank you enough.
Well, if you need us, you know where we are.
So we're going to wrap it up there, folks. And thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. I hope you got as much out of that conversation as I did. Our hearts really go out to Jack and John and Deborah and their ordeal and their story. I hope you guys got something from that experience and their story. Also, want to thank Debbie Chestnut and Lori. Debbie is a psychic medium and paranormal investigator, and Lori is our own psychic medium for Houston Ghost Research. She also has her own business, LoneStarJams.com. If you're interested in checking out Lori's awesome jams, jellies, and preserves, go to LoneStarJams.com. She's also available for readings at LoneStarMedium.com. And obviously, if you're interested in Ormus or some of the other stuff we're developing, check out Blue Rose Alchemy. And don't forget about the spiritual remediation course we're putting together. You can go sign up on our mailing list for that to get the discounted rate when we decide to go, or we're ready to go live later this year. That's at spiritremediation.com. And thanks for tuning in.